It is my pleasure to be here today to share with you the results of my research, comparative research on equestrianism in Brazil and in France. There is general consensus amongst European scholars of equestrian history and culture that horses, after playing a fundamental role as partner to humans in work, transportation, and military functions, had by mid-20th century been largely replaced by machines. Yet, although actual numbers of equines in Northern European societies dropped drastically as they lost their role in production, their importance was transferred to other social terrains as companion to humans in sport, leisure, and other functions from symbolic to therapeutic. As the 21st century with its knowledge economy becomes established, we see what appears to be an ever-increasing trend towards urbanization across Europe. More and more people live in cities. These urban lives can be characterized by the replacement of social bonds with technological ones, by growing levels of stress and challenges to well-being as a result of increasingly sedentary lives, as well as by a relative increase in prosperity among the individuals involved. In a globalized economy where it seems that places are becoming more and more alike and where surveillance increasingly penetrates both public and private lives, there appears to be a growing need to balance all this with something which allows individuals to take contact with the world in which human beings evolved, a world of nature and of the types of interactions between human and the world for which our organism has evolved for hundreds of thousands of years. Latin American countries figure on the list of the 5 nations with the largest horse population in the world, following the United States with a horse population of over 9 million, and China, the one-time horse giant whose equine population has dwindled to some 7 million, come Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina with estimates of around 6 million, 5 million, and 3 million, respectively. Horses are recognized as important historical icons in Latin American cultures. However, at least in the Brazilian case, a complicated history of modernization has discursively associated rural life with a past better to be left behind. Current models of agribusiness have been hostile to the lives and lifestyles of traditional populations, although notions of sustainable development and other critical debates and movements have been working to re-signify rurality. Debates and practices regarding new ruralities and neo-rural populations are also pertinent here. In this case, comparing a European society, France, with a very significant equestrian culture, and a Latin American society, Brazil, that has the 4th largest horse population in the world, may shed light on a number of sociological, anthropological, historical, and economic issues and debates. There are certainly strengths and weaknesses to be uncovered in each case, and comparison may render much that can be useful in thinking about development policy, potential, and partnership. I have explored a wide variety of equestrian sites, from elite classical show jumping and dressage, thoroughbred horse racing, rodeos, endurance, and para-endurance, and numerous other places and moments of equestrian sport and leisure, including rural and urban participants, amateurs and professionals, that vary in terms of class, race, and gender. We note in Brazil the persistence of the working horse, an estimated 80% of the equine population, concentrated particularly in the cattle industry. Also noticeable is the strong presence of horses in rural and many urban and urban periphery environments. The horse is a source of meaning, pleasure, and shared social experience in Brazilian rural and semi-rural communities. Certain spheres of equestrian culture and practice are following worldwide trends of feminization, yet there is still considerable male dominance in many of its sectors. The concept of popular equestrian cultures emerges from our research on equestrian practices in contemporary Brazil. We refer to horse and riding cultures that may be distinguished from elite forms of equestrianism. and are rooted in rural modes of work and life, yet are kept alive through contemporary identities and practices. Such practices commonly include cavalgadas, or rides that are organized periodically in rural and semi-rural milieu, such as well as rodeo festivities and competition. The Criollo horse, for example, is a breed that has been consecrated by practices and identities in the southern region of this large South American nation, and its specific characteristics, rusticity, docility, easy keeping, hardiness, and so forth, make it particularly suited to the sport and leisure needs of people who have perhaps only a large backyard or pasture to offer animals that they themselves care for on a daily basis. Important keys to changing ways of thinking about horses can be found in Chevalier's fascinating study on the changing representations of equines in film and literature. She argues that there has been a veritable paradigm change from an initially instrumental conception of the equine toward a 20th century mode in which the horse became a sort of alter ego for human beings with troubled selves, unmet emotional needs, or simply in search of new forms of subjective connection to the animal. My objectives in France were to look into a variety of practices in the French equestrian sector, attempting to capture fundamental social dynamics that inhere there, particularly in terms of work, sport, and leisure, rural and urban relations, questions of class, race, and gender, and human, non-human animal relations, in a country in which there is a consolidated industry as well as cultural consciousness of the history and importance of the horse-human coevolution. My methods included, initially, visits to diverse sites of equestrian practice, including racetracks and technical schools that train workers for the racing industry, horse fairs, the Saumur School, as well as the Saumur Cavalry School, pony clubs, riding schools, jumping and horse competitions, carriage driving competitions. I did participant observation wherever and whenever possible, and this was followed by bibliographic and document-based research. France, like many other countries, has an age-old equestrian culture, which is still alive and well-nourished by various international and local influence, and sometimes by conflicting ideas. Thus, it becomes harder and harder to speak of one French equestrian scene in any reductive way. The contemporary scene includes a French tradition which itself has become the subject of disputes, as well as a growing interest in a wide variety of amateur and professional practices and equestrian disciplines, from trail riding in wilderness areas, forms of equestrian theater and performance, to Camargue and Western-style equitation. Over the course of a few months in France, I enjoyed being a participant observer at a publicly subsidized riding club on the outskirts of Paris. Its riding public was made up of women, mostly, and men as well, boys and girls, who were pony clubbers. The club grounds attracted observers of all sorts who were able to move freely around, watch classes, and enjoy restaurant and cafe facilities. I understood this as an illustration of one of the key ways that equestrianism maintains visibility in contemporary French society amongst its urban dwellers. And although considered an expensive activity, it is also one that sometimes strives to bring newcomers and less privileged groups into its arenas. It is also highly regulated through sporting institutions and promotes an emphasis on learning of style and technique as evolved from elite forms of equestrianism. In addition to my several visits to Chantilly, Vincennes, and Maison Lafitte horse racing centers, and the opportunity there to get to know several women who work as trainers and groom riders in the racing industry, I had another interesting backside experience, a look into how young people are brought into the field. Among the diverse forms of organized training for those who desire to work in equestrian careers are the vocational programs offered by 5 schools in different parts of the country. I spent an afternoon at the Grosbois School with the director, who spoke at length to me about the challenges of simultaneously providing secondary school education and vocational training for the horse world to girls and boys at the school she is in charge of. In France, this means horses and middle-class sport and leisure, in general terms, and that creates a highly organized and institutionalized equestrian culture. Equitation is recognized as cultural heritage with corresponding institutional supports, state sponsorship of much equestrian activity, and a veritable horse industry lobby. There's a high level of bureaucratic control, which means a number of things. It includes promotion, investment, and the possibility of more protection for horse industry workers at different levels. It has also meant a high degree of feminization. In both France and Brazil, there are emergent trends that are related to what we could call the postmodern condition and the challenges of the 21st century. Horses have an increasingly recognized role in sustainable development in social and environmental terms, related to the growth of new forms of environmental consciousness, equestrian tourism, and the promotion of a lifestyle more connected to nature. There's also the question of horse as healer, notions that horses help us to reconnect to lost human potential. And this is reflected, among other things, in the growing therapeutic role of equines. Women are increasingly present in amateur, professional, and sporting fields. And this seems to be a consolidated process in France and a bit more of an irregular one in Brazil that touches some arenas of equestrian practice very significantly and others yet still very little. In Brazil, the equestrian scenario can be characterized by a lack of institutionalized recognition and support, a lack of reliable and systematized information on equestrian history, cultures, and practices. Although breeders' associations and certain segments of business and government have made some attempt at gathering information and putting together a database, there is also a lack of organized vocational training that coexists with high degrees of precarization of work and life for people who work in the sector. Although there are opportunities for professional development through higher education for young people who are able to access that sphere. There's also a strong and widespread popular equestrianism in Brazil, which is embraced by a very diverse population. France is characterized by an elite equestrian history and a middle-class present. Thus, there is a greater tendency for equestrian activities to be relatively restricted to elites or middle classes, and this stands in contrast to the large and persistent popular equestrian culture that I have mentioned in the Brazilian case. I come to the end of my presentation today, and it is time to thank those who have made my research possible over many years. In particular, my heartfelt gratitude goes to Sylvine Picot-Chevalier for her enthusiasm and intellectual partnership, and for the support also at the University of Angers of Dr. Philippe Violet. I would also like to thank Dr. Monica Spoon at the EHESS in Paris, and the Brazilian research agencies CNPq and CAPES for many, many years of support. Thank you again and again.